I think this is getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Completely separate just from our industry. How many times do we hear people who are afraid of being canceled? How many times people are so
Yes.
afraid of stepping outside the box because what if people say that like I'm wrong, or they say that I'm saying something mean, and then I'm out.
All right, folks, what's up? It's your boy Mike here for another episode of Creative Risk. Today we're tackling something that is a huge part of, I think, what holds artists and creatives back in their careers, especially actors, and that is the fear of what other people think. You know, that little voice in your head that says, what if they hate it? Who am I to put that out there? They're going to judge me. They're going to think I'm a try hard. They're going to, you know, all that annoying little voice in our head that projects our fears on other people and prevents us from taking big action, right? So that little voice is the dream killer. Really, it stops us from sharing our work, from building our audience, and even collaborating with others. All things that are kind of givens in 2024 when it comes to making a sustainable living as an artist. And in this episode, we are going to rip that fear a new one. We're going to get after them. We're going to give you some tools to do the same and to squash your fear about what other people think, to give you some practical tools and advice as we dissect it, break it down. So as always on this episode, we've got some real talk, some laughs, a lot of tangents, and a whole lot of tough love coming your way. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, or a 1-star review if you hate this. We promise to read all of the reviews, even the bad ones, and the ones that make us question our life choices. So yeah, enjoy this episode, guys. So happy that you're with us. Bye. Hello, friends. Good. Okay, we're here. We're live.
We are live and in color. Live, and isn't that a TV show? Live and living in live and in color.
I think that's like an intro to like old TV shows or something.
No, but isn't there like a show? It's
like living alive and in color or some shit.
I think Live and in Color might be a series too.
Wow.
What?
How was your 4th of July?
Good, fun. We had like literally there was like 4 or 5 people that came over and we played games to celebrate the United States.
Oh, who came over?
It was Tej and his boyfriend Ethan. It was Megan and Ryan. Nice. And it was this is bad. Why can't I? Oh, Cameron. Wow. Cameron. We actually played a game called Pit. Are you a game person? I don't think you and I have ever played a game before.
I'm not really a game person. No.
I love games. Yeah, like if you were like, let's make this entire episode a game right now, and like we're just gonna play a game, I'd be like, okay. I love games.
What's the pit? What's Pit? Is that where you like throw people in a pit and you?
It's a fun game. And
what is it?
I would definitely recommend it and play it again. It's a very simple gist. Basically, there's a bell, like a ding, 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 and at a hotel. I always love using those when I go to. If no one's there, I love dinging the bell. You know, and you have like you.
No, you must be really well liked.
I was actually saying, I was looking at the person. I'm like, "Hello, I dung the bell," and then you have like in your hand, you have like different kinds of things: barley, wheat, oats, da 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 da. And then on each round, you ding the bell, and then you're basically trying to say, "Okay," and you're trying to get all of the same. That's how you're trying to win the round, to get 10 wheat, barley, hay, whatever. And so you're like, "Okay, I'll trade 3. I'll trade 3. I'll trade 3," and then you trade around the board. And you're trying to get points, and there's a wild card and a card that like if you have in your hand is negative points, and you don't actually say what you have. You're just trying to be the first to get like all 10 of whatever, and the first to get all 10 dings the bell. Then you count up, you win a certain amount of points based off of whatever the product is. You know, wheat's 100, corn is 60, da 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 da, and then the first to get to 250 wins. It was fun.
Isn't it amazing how like when I was doing Arcadia, like there's this whole thing called game theory that's literally like a lot of these people who develop games. Like I've met a few people who've made like board games and stuff. Like they're like math geniuses. Like
Makes total sense.
a lot of them are like, because there's this whole, and I wish I have such a bad retention thing. Like I learned all this shit about game theory and then like I forgot it. It's like 6 months ago.
Here's
like,
where I bet you're a game. Here's where I never really understand when people say they're not game people, unless you don't like competition, which could be the truth. I love competition, but the thing about games is like there's all kinds of games. There's simple luck games. There's more physical games. There's team games. There's strategy. I love strategy. I love like how can I love Monopoly. It's the old classic, but I love fucking Monopoly. I love chess. I love games where you're like have to look like 7 steps ahead. That's like a lot of fun for me. And I bet you like what kind of game, like what is a game? What's an example of a game that you would enjoy?
I don't know. Well, I just don't go out of my way to play games. That's the thing. Like I never go out. I'll play a game. I enjoy games, but I never go like, I'm never like, oh, I want to play a game.
You have to come over. You and Carolina.
I watched Saw 2. I watched Saw 2 yesterday.
That was your...
I want to play a game. That was my, I want to play a game. But no, but it's just
Carolina.
So
I bet you Carolina would play. I want you and Carolina to come over and we're going to play games.
She's sensitive. She's really sensitive. She doesn't like competition.
Isn't she a gamer?
So she probably... Yeah, she is actually, but she plays like like whatever, like I don't know, like farming game.
Oh, and then she would not like me because I would come for her. Meaning I would be like, I'm like you lost. Yeah. I'm like that kind of.
Yeah, and she's really not about that. But what's interesting that I'll shut up is like there's all like these like people try to measure like okay like when people basically what game theory is all about as far as I understand it is like collaboration and competition, right? So it's like when are two people going to work together and when are they going to like go again? Like if one person can win, if like basically there's some math equation that's like if two people have, I forgot what the fuck it is. I don't want to go into it once, but it's like if two people have the opportunity to win, if they just trust the other person or one person can win everything, right? If two people can split 50-50, as long as they both put down like a red card, right? And they'll split the winnings 50-50. But if one person puts down a red and one person puts down a black, then the person who put down the black gets 100%. And if they both put down the black, then they get nothing, right? And it's like, and so, the smartest, the most logical thing to do is for both people to put down the red. So they can just split the earnings 50-50. But it's amazing how often people do not do that.
Well, this is
but that's game that is the I think that's like I may be really wrong here, but the pendulum on which like game theory swings. It's like how often are people going to collaborate, which is like the smartest thing to do sometimes, versus how often are they going to compete to try and take all.
Do you know what's really I've noticed in all games that I play, and this would be you, by the way, what I'm about to say. People don't trust me when we play games. They don't trust me. Like when I try to like literally when they just they think like they can like see like even when I'm not even trying to be sneaky, I can feel their lack of trust of me in a game. And I'm saying this in relation to this because like even like when I'm like trying to work with someone, they're like, it's like I must give off an energy that's like I'm gonna fuck you all.
Yeah, I wonder what that energy is. It's like, well, I wonder what that energy is. It's weird.
That would be you. That would be you. Well, you would not trust me. Anyway, so that
I would no, but it's like, what is that? Like, what's that energy?
Yeah, like, what am I doing?
Like, well, I think it's like. Well, I think it's like because you're well spoken. It's like it's almost like sort of like it feels like you're manipulating, maybe because you're like smart and you're not come up. You should do more of the Columbo.
Oh yeah.
Like act a little more sloppy.
Hey,
and just
what's
be
my
like,
cards?
I
don't know how to do my. It's true.
Exactly.
It's true.
Maybe
that's fair. I might try that strategy. So you celebrated the United States of America's birthday and our great President Joe Biden.
I went to
my
aunt's in Connecticut. Right. I went to my aunt's in Connecticut, and then we watched Saw 2.
Are you back? Where are you right now?
I'm at the Bedlam office.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, folks. Welcome, folks. Welcome, folks. Before we dive into today's episode, which is all about fear of people's opinions, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit and break it down, we're going to read another one of our reviews because we love people's opinions.
Sorry, it's been a little slow on the reviews, but I think we're only going to do them when it's just the two of us.
I think that's right. So we don't have to hold up our guests, you know. So this one is from last September from Tay93803, and it is titled "Hilarious, Relatable, Authentic." And this person says 5 stars, 5 stars. Duh. No, 5 stars. So far, we only have 5-star reviews. It's good. We only have 10 5 stars, but we'll take them. Couldn't recommend this podcast more to the actor/creative community. Mike and Joshua are literally so hysterical together. Their takes and strategies on building a sustainable career are incredibly honest while also being actionable. And then she gives us, I'm guessing it's a girl, unless boys Tay or they, whatever, 1,000 out of 10. So like rather than 10 out of 10, it's 1,000 out of 10. We blew past it.
Wow.
10 times 100.
We'll read all reviews, guys, including 1 stars.
Including 1 stars.
We'll read them all.
Absolutely, and we'll shit on you.
Yeah, even the tasteless swine fucks out there. We'll give you airtime.
I like when you call people swine.
You fucking piglets. Swines. All right, so what's today's episode about, Joshua?
Okay, so this has actually been a bit of a theme in several of our episodes, but I think it's worth really continuing to hone in on it. And it's really specifically through the lens of fear of people's opinions in particular, and what that does for us, how it helps us or how it doesn't help us. I would say in terms of today specifically, It's primarily through the lens of how it doesn't help us, because we're specifically talking about the fear that comes around what other people think of us, right? And ultimately, and we hear this, I mean, listen, I would argue, I would argue that this is the number one thing, truly, no bullshit, that holds people back, that debilitates people from moving things forward. When we work with people, how often, but what if they, but I don't know if it's this fear, and specifically a fear of people's opinions. And just to say, I think this is getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Completely separate just from our industry. How many times do we hear people who are afraid of being canceled? How many times people are so afraid of stepping outside the box because what if people say that like I'm wrong, or they say that I'm saying something mean, and then I'm out?
Well, I think you're spot on. Yeah, I because I want to talk about that, but can I just say one quick thing about why it may help us and what the balance is? The balance is like, look, because all we talk about how this is capitalism, and I think about that episode with Gus Haggerty, which is, I think, one of my favorite episodes I think we've done, because it's
episode
like
24,
Gus
discovering your creative voice through social media.
And so basically, like, because we talk about like how often, like, as Gus is an actor, he's growing a social media following, how often is he considering audience? And he does consider audience, right? Like, we live in a capitalist world, and it's like there needs to be an element of understanding at least what value you provide. Sure. We've talked about this ad nauseum past couple of episodes, I think, with people. That's capitalism. So you do need to put yourself in the other person's shoes and understand how you are received.
Okay. Yeah.
And so you do need to do that at some point in the process. Yeah. The question, that I don't have the answer to is what's the perfect balance between considering and taking in people's opinions as a way to, operate within a capitalistic, system, and hopefully, understand what value you provide, and when does too much of it get in the way? I don't have the answer to that magical balance, but you know what I mean?
Well, I do. And I would argue that even hearing you say that out loud, it's not so much that we shouldn't care or take it in. It's a matter of how personally we take it. Because if we were selling candles and talking about these reviews, we would want to hear what people have to say, but it wouldn't necessarily affect our soul. As we always, the reason why this
Sure.
relates especially to us as actors and artists in particular is because an opinion doesn't necessarily seem like a reflection of always of just our art or a choice. It's like, I mean, we've talked about this in terms of even like basics of like getting criticism in rehearsal, getting a note. You get a note, it dings something inside of you because you're like, oh, that wasn't perfect.
Sure.
My choice, me, as opposed to like, no, I just want you to pick up the box instead of the shoe or whatever. And so it's like it's like fear of people's opinions that turn into that feel like personal attacks on us and our souls, as opposed to what you're kind of also talking about, which is valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's hard. It's a hard line to, because I'll give you like an example. It's like, oh, like if I'm self-pitching to a casting director, and like, my fear of their opinion is like, oh, like, we'll talk more about like, oh, they're gonna think I'm desperate, they're gonna think I'm a try hard, they're gonna think I'm, but it's like also like, you don't just say fuck that entirely. Like you have to consider 100%. That because you have to consider, because that can inform strategy, right? And it's like, so if you're just kind of barreling, although I will say probably in this business, it's probably a good 60-40, if not 70-30 of the people who are really successful, sadly, or most of the time, like sociopathic people who really don't give a shit, who really are like on their path. And it's but
how is that sociopathic? Because let me just say this.
Well, no, that's not sociopathic. That's not I'm just saying that like sociopaths are very successful in this business because they don't have, I'm not saying that they're sociopathic because they don't care about people's opinions. Sure. I'm saying that they don't care about people's opinions because they're sociopathic. And so like those people do, like, yes, they may ding a couple of, they may like stomp some heads on the way, and that's not what I'm talking about, or and that's not what we're going to be talking about. But it's like probably overall not caring what people think, even in this capitalistic system we're talking about, and overall, and then coloring it with considering others and how that relates to you and what you can bring. It's probably better to not give a shit of what people think, more so, in my opinion. Probably.
Or again, and to be honest with you, this is a whole other thing we could spend time on another time, which is, well, how do you filter? How do you so for example, you email that casting director and you self-pitch and they say something like, I mean, what if they were really explicit and they were like, received this email, I have to say, there are many modes at which, you can try to get through to me or whatever it may be. And this does feel a little bit desperate to be 100%. Let's just say they said something like that. I'm making this up. Or you got back to you. You know what I mean? Like, your rep says, hey, we heard from so-and-so casting that you emailed them and we have you to know that they felt a little pandering. And how do you then take that information and go, okay, what do I do with that in a way that does it reframe my strategy? Do I and not what it, I think does to do?
I hear you.
Because even a step beyond, I just want to get to like a macro point that I want to make here too, is that the fear of potential criticism or people's opinions stops people from even making any action whatsoever.
That's right.
So,
well, and you're talking about fear versus consideration. Fear is something different than fearing people's opinions is different than considering people's opinions.
Yes.
Right. It's like, and that's, that's a big difference. Like when you're taking it personally like that, like I think you're hitting the line, but kind of to circle back to your point about cancel culture. I mean, look, we're seeing it, we're seeing fear in a lot of ways. It is amazing how often people, like even on the podcast, I'm sorry to say, like people we've talked to, like people keep their cards close to the chest. Like, because everybody is
Yeah.
afraid of having the wrong
Yeah.
opinion. And sadly,
Yeah.
and a lot of times these opinions are not insane opinions. They're just like, they may be outside of the homogenous world of like,
Right.
in our like the New York theater scene, but they're
Right.
not like radical extreme fucking opinions.
Right.
And it's like, but it's amazing how much fear there is now
Yes.
in our it's frankly, it's fascist in my opinion. I feel that way. It's like and expressing anything that is slightly off of the party line,
Yeah.
slightly off of, and by the party line I don't mean a specific party, I mean just like kind of like top down, what, like, we're being fed as like, this is the correct way to act, these are the correct opinions to have. If you operate outside of that, then you're bad, you're evil.
Well, and
And
here's a major, here's
it's
one,
really damaging.
and to your point about it being damaging, here's one of the things that I would argue is most damaging about, because we've talked about a lot about this the past few months, actually. This herd mentality that we're all adopting as a society,
Right.
is neutralizing our points of view, and the reason why that is so
Right.
dangerous for artists in particular is because that's what the fuck we're selling, is a point of view. It's
Right.
not my French accent, I promise you. It is quite literally what my point of view is. And if we, so just in a general sense, if we approach
Wild.
our careers and our lives from this idea of like, well, what is everybody else doing? What if we color within the lines, then we sort of begin to strip away and peel away our point of view.
Right. And it's like, it's like literally it's what we're selling, but it's also like, why, if we're not willing to have a strong point of view that is uniquely ours, then what is the
Right.
point? Like literally, it's controversial, I guess, in the sense that it's like, that's not all it takes to be an artist, but like literally then why are you needed?
Yes.
Why? There's a million people who could do what you do. It's like from a skill set perspective.
Literally.
So it's like, if you're not there to like bring something unique to the table, and we can go on and on about that. We should do a whole episode. I want to do a whole episode on like people who've been canceled,
Artists in particular,
like just like and yeah, artists who've been canceled or like whatever. Like I kind of want to do a whole, like there's a few people coming to mind in terms of like the guy who runs like the Latino Musical Theater Lab. Listeners should like kind of examine that. Carolina was telling me about it. It's interesting.
Or like Ari Roth.
It's interesting. Like
I mean, because
yes, exactly.
Yeah, and but we would need to do some real work to like make sure we understand the full scope of things. But I agree with you. I think that's super interesting. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more though of fear of people's opinions and how it affects specific elements of our creative careers where we see it pop up the most. And I would argue, let's start with the biggest one of them all,
right,
which is marketing.
Right.
Because just to take a step back, we've said this many times before, but just have to say it, it doesn't matter what the hell you are doing. If people don't know it exists, if people don't know that it's available for purchase and then what the goods are, it ain't going to be sold.
Right.
And I'm saying that just because every product has to be marketed differently, right? There's no one way. So for 100%. Our creative work, what is that? And you and I have been talking about this a lot. It's not that there's one size fits all. Let's be really clear. This does not mean that everybody has to have a fucking TikTok with 2 million followers. That's not it. Just in a general sense,
right,
we have to find a way to say, here's what I do, here's why I'm great. But
and yeah, you have to be a known entity.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put yourself out there in some capacity. In some capacity, even the lightest marketing will have to require you taking a step outward to like be seen, be heard in some way. And the reason why fear of people's opinions really plays into here is I think the number one thing is people will think I'm desperate. This is the number one sort of fear people bring up as artists when it comes to any type of marketing.
And why does that matter? I mean,
yes, there's also
go further there, because why? Meaning, what do people? We've talked about this before, but this always like gets under my skin. This one in particular, because what do people want it to be? And meaning, go ahead.
Well, I was talking about, and this is, I think, a value of ours, and I think there's a lack of transparency in the business.
Mm-hmm.
I think something, and all artistic mediums. I don't know. I think this probably started in the 70s or some shit, but it's like this idea of the artist as aloof. The idea of the artist as, I think it's a uniquely American thing in the 70s. Frankly, it's like it's probably started there where it's like, oh no, the artist is supposed to be cool. It's supposed to have seemed like it naturally
Sure.
happened, right? Like it's just meant to be.
Sure.
This is what Hollywood publicists have been doing for fucking decade. That's what they were doing for decades. It's like it has to seem effortless, because if it seemed like it was effortful to rise in this business, then that means that if you
There's
had to
less for
work
your
for
art.
it.
Your art didn't have that
Exactly.
magical power that propelled you. Sure.
Exactly.
Sure.
And so this is, I think, an overall theme of all work, which is what all of this work is like. People do not want to seem like they tried for
Sure.
it. And it's like that they worked hard at it, which is wild to me, because that's valued. People value hustle in every other vertical and every other business in this country. But if you hustle as an artist, then, it's still a cultural malady. So people are afraid, by marketing in any way, sense, or form, that if you're having to do that, if you're having to play that game, then that means that you must be desperate for attention, opportunities, that something's not working. And so if you're putting yourself out there in that way, it's a sign of weakness. And which is, I think that's changing with, frankly, for the better, with like Gen Z probably and shit, like these younger people, because they just understand better than I think people our age, of like, that's bullshit. Like you have to, like, they just know that, that the power of
But
it.
again, I think the thing that I
Um,
want to highlight here in terms of fear of people's opinions too is people will think that I'm desperate. But what's funny is
right.
I would argue that's not true. That's the thing too. Interestingly enough, think about it. Think about it. Think about when people and there's partially a how here. It's always it's in the nuance, and everyone's going to be different. But when you see someone, when and again, it's in the how, because to be 100%, when I see people post self tapes and things, I'm like, oh, but when people share like their good shit and they're like, look at, like, I don't think they're desperate. Like, that's not the thought that goes through my head. But again, the fear of people's opinions stops us before we do anything.
It's true till it's not. I mean, that's what's funny about I think about even someone like Gus,
Mm-hmm.
and Gus Haggerty, like, and I would be open in saying this, when he first started posting those videos, when he had like 2,000 followers, I was like, what is he doing? Why is he doing this? And then,
But should he
so
have cared?
not that it was,
Clearly not.
of course not, clearly not, because when it starts to work, guess what happens? And this is another thing that's
Rashad always says
stupid about
every
caring.
nobody wants you until everybody wants you. Rashad always says that.
Exactly. So that's why you can't be measuring that too much, because people's opinions are fickle. They're just fucking like, and you have no control over them. So, I viewed Gus one way when he started initially doing that. And then now I view him in a completely different way
Interesting.
because he was successful at it. And so it's
Interesting.
like, so if you're going to, that's why it's so silly, because yeah, people can be judging you until it becomes, oh no, he was smart for doing
Exactly.
that. It's like,
Exactly.
and it's so silly to consider that. But I talk about this press
Oh yeah. Well,
thing.
first
I
of all,
think
we
this is
you always hear
interesting.
like there's no such thing as bad press, right? Because coverage is coverage. Getting your name out there. Our supreme leader Donald Trump understands this probably better than anybody. While he cares about the angles, and it's how he taught his you know loyal follower Matt Gaetz, the modern day Joe McCarthy, who just understood, like, let me just get me in front of the cameras and I'll get some coverage. But anyway, I say this because I think we're all afraid of bad press, the potential of it, because we don't want it to ding our credibility. But just to say, in a macro sense, who cares about people's opinions there? Because you just again, there's no such thing as bad press. However, let me get more specific. I don't read reviews. we hear this. You know, I don't think you read reviews. You actually asked me to,
I don't read reviews.
but this is interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like because what we have here too is it's about understanding perception. This goes going to go back to your first point about capitalism and and this fear of people's
And
opinions.
wanting to be better. Well, and wanting to be better, right? It's like, shouldn't you, Matt Koplik was talking about this when we had him on. It's like with criticism in general, it's like, well, as an artist, don't you want to take in criticism because it's like it'll help you get better? It's like, don't you want to take that in as opposed to just dismissing it? I think with the reviews, it's about intention, right? It's like, and we'll get to like where you're not fearing it, but where if you can really engage with the review and be like, use it. You're right. There should be nothing wrong, and it should, of like understanding how people perceive you so that you can be better and like disagreeing or agreeing.
Well,
I'll
oh,
never
please go ahead.
forget. Well, it's just like, I got when I did Arcadia, like I think I got generally positive reviews for that. But someone told me that, like, I think my dad told me that, like, somebody said I was too angry. And the reason why I was like, well, I like that, you know, I could take that in and not let it affect, because I knew, like, well, they just didn't like my choice. They didn't like a choice I made, with the character, which is I could take that in and I can agree or disagree with it. If I have enough self
Right.
confidence in something, then like I doesn't mean I have to take in the review and
Right.
go, yes, it's correct. But I should. You're right. I shouldn't have be. Right now, I don't have enough confidence, I guess, like in my process. I do have a lot of confidence, more than I've ever had, but right now me reading reviews is all about like
It's very
validation, and
self-aware
about
of
it's
you.
not about getting
No,
better.
well, that's very self-aware of
Yes,
you
it's
because
it's not about getting better. Yeah.
because now that's a hard thing to admit, but for you, see, I would argue that like if more people could do that, to go like, well, where am I right now? Because one of the things I always say about reviews too is, well, you can't take the good if you don't take the bad. You can't be like, oh, they got it, they
Well, I
liked
agree
me,
with that.
and
I agree with that.
therefore they're good. It's like, well, maybe this person does have something to say, but either way, being able to, with this fear of people's opinions, and then like, like maybe with some distance, it would be useful for you to go back and review, and you being the universal you, but
I think
reviews,
that's
and to
right.
go, how does this inform, what can I take here? This is not necessarily review based, but I'm working really hard on this upcoming appointment, and so the same tapes I was telling you about earlier, I sent them to a few different people from different walks of my life and community, and very different feedback across the board. And it was and it
Interesting.
was an ideas, very different ideas. Someone who was literally in the show in London, and even has done some of the songs, but is coming at it from the lens of like, well, this is exactly what it is. From other people who are more active, but very, very variations. And it's this interesting exercise of like, to your point about confidence in your own work and opinion, to go, okay, how do I take this and go, what does this mean for me in order to turn out the
Right.
best potential offering, and not the one
Well,
subjective idea?
exactly. Well, and like, look, I mean, that's where like criticism and all of and notes are important, is because, well, the reason why I think it's scary to read that stuff is because it gets you, and we'll talk about this later, but like it gets you in results world. It's hard to make art or to be successful in anything when you are overly concerned with the results, in my
Sure,
opinion.
I hear that.
They prove that, like, getting into flow, one of the things that keeps you out of flow is thinking about end result too
Sure.
much. It's like, so if you're like, if you are reading something and it's making you go like, oh, I can't come off this way, or I can't be like this, or I can't to me, that's all result oriented.
Yes.
That's all. That has nothing to do with the process. So if you can filter all of this stuff, like seeking other people's opinions, seeking criticism, seeking feedback, which of course should be, which, let's be real here, That's probably a great thing to do. That's a great thing to do for any business or any artist, probably. But how can you then? I think the challenge is then how can you filter that through a process oriented approach as opposed to a result oriented approach of like, I need to be more like this. I want people to like me more, think I'm better. And so let me go at it this way. You know what I
I
mean?
do. And it's funny when I sent out the email with those tapes, I was like, I want candid. I need it because if I want to be the best I can
Yeah.
in the room, I've got to do that. Okay,
Right.
let's talk. I'll actually talk about the biggest thing that low key for me has sort of inspired this episode more than anything else as part of marketing, which is social media. And and
Right.
and the reason this is so crucial is because in a macro sense, this, we've been talking about this a lot. We live in a moment. Gary Vaynerchuk has sort of been leading our charge, so to speak, in terms of his great book, Day Trading Attention, that you should check out. It really is great, because it's basically about how we live in a moment when the most effective marketing in the world is free and democratized, and that is social media, and that it's not going to
Right.
last forever. And again, caveat up front, this is not about 2 million followers on TikTok and posting 8 TikTok. It's not what it's about. It is about finding your voice on socials, i.e., that great episode with Gus, who is a really interesting dynamic artist, to in order to what grow an owned audience, because growing an owned audience is part of what is our most powerful tool today. And yet how many
Right.
artists, actors, especially straight actors, quote unquote, struggle with this because they care so much about what other people think about them. So they end up essentially not posting because, going back to the desperate piece, they don't want to seem like a tryhard. It
Well, you
Yeah,
know what's
please.
interesting about that? Oh,
No,
sorry,
no, you
please.
you get where I'm going.
Well, I was going to say, like, what he said that you're getting at that I think sort of changed the paradigm for me is any excuse you have for not being active on socials, probably
Right.
95% of it is that it's actually a fear of what other people think.
Exactly.
It's not time. It's not because it's not like I don't know what to post, because if you didn't give a shit what people thought, then you would post whatever the fuck and then find what works. You would learn.
Which is
You'd be
exactly what
okay
Gus
with
did.
publicly falling on your face. Exactly. You'd be okay with publicly falling on your face and learning.
Right.
But the number one reason why people is like, oh, like I don't know what to post. I don't want to, I want to be on brand even, which yes, ideally, but at the end of the day, like you have to learn by action. And I think it is probably the number one reason. If you are not actively using socials, I would frame it that the number one reason you're not doing it is because you're probably afraid of what
I
people think of you
totally
if you
agree.
if you
And
engage.
obviously, there are things like, well, it's so much work. I mean, there's lots of
Yeah.
things that make it challenging. But the other thing, and this is interesting, is I always find it fascinating when people say, well, I delete the apps all the time.
Right.
And because it's that, and in some ways it's not even about just sharing content. Part of what social media does is it makes you compare. You look at this because
Right.
and you're looking at other people's big successes and or seeming successes, just to state an obvious.
Right.
you know it's all curated, it's all bullshit, and that's what kills me too about social media. It's not real, it's not real life. No one's out there like, this is my real, my real exact authentic self. I just don't buy that people do that.
Right.
Even when Gus posted that thirst trap today, and I saw you liked it, Gus is really making an appearance in this episode, and his caption was something like, it was like a shirtless pic at him at the gym, and he was like, it's always so hard because you want to post a thirst trap, but then you're completely devastated when it doesn't. He puts it through the lens of humor when it doesn't get enough likes. But the truth is like, it's like we just play this fucking dance on social media where we try to get the same end result. You and I talk about this all the time with even our artist strategy obviously, and how it relates to our audience. But most importantly, that we're so afraid of what people think. I think it's actually easier with us with something like artist strategy and creative risk because it's not, again, not necessarily our souls, but when it's you, the individual, when you are posting shit,
Right.
this fear looms over us and stops us in our tracks. And I think you brought up a good point. We're not even able to get, because this is the big thing about this whole episode. We're not even able to get into the cycle of let me fail. Let me
Right. Right.
let me put the content out, which is what social media requires you to do, to put shit out there in order to fail, in order to go, let me then try something else instead.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I have nothing to add to that except like, look, compare, I have nothing to add to that. I think you're spot on with all of that. Yeah, period. Because the negative,
The
even
the
having here,
mhm.
like, thinking, yeah, please. I'm not
I
adding
was going to
anything
say
at this
then
moment. As
I
you
was going
sip
to
your
say
bay.
that the final thought here that we're afraid of is posting things, and it's part of it, but like it's easy, especially with larger platforms, to get negative comments. I mean, I remember
Right. I think that's a good
I
point.
remember when we first started running ads, and people would comment sometimes crazy shit on our socials, and both of us would sometimes respond back directly. But the truth is like the internet's a wild fucking third world country out there, and you never know what's coming your way. And so again, the fear of potential negative feedback doesn't even allow us to make the choices. Just really important to consider that, because again, to your point about what Gary Vee essentially sums up is probably likely the number one reason most people don't engage is, do you want to be that person avoiding the most powerful marketing tool we have in the world because of what some random person in Idaho fucking thinks about you, or what your Aunt Lucy says? Who cares? It is a giant capitalistic marketing tool anyway. This is not actually like representative of
Yes.
our true selves. Therefore, really consider that as
Yeah.
you go. Do I really care about what my coworker from Applebee's thinks about whatever the fuck I post? Because good thing that Gus didn't give a shit that what you thought about when he started posting that content. Because if he did, he would be much more the worse for it. You know?
But let me say this too about like, this is why it's important to take it back to, I think, I know I keep circling back to this, but process oriented principles. Because look, if you're posting on social media nonstop and you're not getting the whole point of social media, I'm sorry, is to sell
Sure.
things,
Yes.
is to sell.
Exactly.
That's the whole point.
Exactly.
So, if your posts are not getting engagement, if you're using social media as it should be used, which is a way to keep people engaged, right, and to in you and your brand, and to potentially, if you so wish, to grow a larger audience, which I think is smart, especially as all of our institutions crumble, etc., then you have to really, so you can't entirely ignore, oh, this post got 2 likes, why?
Right.
Now, per your point,
Right.
this is why it is important to have, I believe, process oriented principles to run this through.
Sure.
Because I think you need to take that data, that cold hard
Yep.
data, and go, well, why would people not like this? Why did this not get a response
Right.
that I was expecting?
Right.
It's not. I don't think that you should fixate. I think you should always be focusing on output, but you shouldn't hyper fixate on it. But you need to consider it.
Yes.
And so, how do you need to have a strong foundation
Yep.
of, again, process oriented principles to run this data through,
Right.
whether it's somebody's response to your email, whether it's a post not getting any likes, whether it's whatever. How do you have a strong core set of values
Sure.
to not get distracted by the, per your point, the person, all about the result, and therefore the personal failure of that,
Yes.
and instead take it through a learning
Yeah.
process of,
And
oh,
yeah,
yeah,
well, just to say that
period.
I really like what you're talking about in terms of developing some sort of process to take in that feedback. And so if you reach it, whether it's the self pitching, whether it's posting on socials, whatever it is, as you go through, if you're like, if you're finding yourself becoming anxious and frightened by it, whatever the hell it is, you probably don't have enough of a process around that to go, well, wait a
Right.
second. And so the probably the pause button comes like, okay, before I go any further with this, so for example, since we're on socials, the easiest way to do that is,
Right.
well, I understand that analytics is a thing. So I
Right.
understand that if I'm posting shit on YouTube, that whether it's the title or the thumbnail or the keywords or the content
Right.
itself or whatever the
Right.
heck it is, so I'm not screaming into the void and then beating up on myself because I'm not seeing results. And same thing with the
Well,
self.
like, let me
Yeah,
give you an
please.
example. Principles. Well, that's why I think having strong principles are important, because they provide a core. It's like, and a process per your point around that. So it's like, okay, did I post? Would I have liked this piece of content? Do I think that this piece of content is engaging? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. If it's a no, then that's already, after you post it, you know, you know, did I optimize it to the best of my ability? Without, completely compromising on what I thought made it good. Yes or no? These are examples of questions that you can ask yourself. Did I take the proper, what were some, did I take all the proper outlets
Yeah.
needed to, make sure that this piece was seen by people, whether that's sharing it to a story,
Right.
whether that's, also doing a TikTok or whatever. So these are examples of questions you could ask yourself that have nothing to do with likes, nothing to do with, you could have a post that blows up results wise, but that you didn't follow the process. You didn't follow and then, so what's the point of that? Because maybe you posted something that millions of people liked, but it's not true to
A
you.
hundred
That's
percent.
not something you would have engaged with. Well, what's the fucking point with
A
that?
hundred percent.
So it's like, how do you create a separate process scorecard that that's related to principles and values that you have decided for yourself, that remain consistent and constant despite whatever external feedback that you're
Because it
getting and
isn't
external
because
output that you're
it
getting.
isn't
you
about it
know
isn't about belying your values, right? This is, this is, I think what you're bringing up is like a macro structure for like giving direction to, your work, your life, in terms of, in order to can take in this idea of, am I living my life based off of fear of people's opinions, and how does it relate to my person
exactly.
and my art as well? Because
Like, really quickly, like,
yeah,
we just
please.
posted something on Artist Strategy that had 2 likes.
Right,
That has
right.
2 likes,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And we have a couple things before that have a lot more engagement.
Right,
And, like, it's not about the 2 likes.
right.
Yes, it is. I need to, like, I take that data, but what, the first question, would I have engaged with that piece of content? The answer is actually no, I would not have. Like, that's the actual answer to the question, is I
Right.
actually would not have probably engaged with that piece. So there you go. Right there. I'm all ready. So how do I take it? This is, you need to have a strong foundation
Yep.
in order to actually take in people's opinions and not be afraid of them. Right. So blah 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 blah. Let's move on to the next thing.
Well, the next one is, super industry related, and I think it's important for a few reasons. It's simply auditioning, and this relates to the idea of fear of people's
Right.
opinions, because, you used a word earlier in regards to reviews and why now might not be the time for you to read them, and it's about validation. Obviously we're going in the room, or we're sending in a tape because we want the job, and therefore we're craving approval. That's what we're looking for here. But
Right.
but our fear of people's opinions also can really fuck with our ability at the same time to do what we do best, which is share ourselves and our point of view. So the fear of people's opinions ultimately creates more anxiety. And I would argue that this is true for performance. It's interesting. I hope this is just thing. Last week when we were doing our show, a couple times you said specifically, I'm really in my head. And the reason why this is interesting to me is because you're a pretty independent thinker in a lot of ways. And you're pretty, you know,
Oh, you're talking about doing our
our
play.
play that we're
Yes,
in.
doing the
Yeah.
play we're in.
And it was making me think about this in relation to this episode, because it's like, well, where does that come from? Well, probably, I could be wrong about this, but it relates to this idea of auditioning or performance, because even though, to your point, we can't and shouldn't take responsibility for what the audience is necessarily thinking or feeling, we're standing up there doing it for
Very hard not
people.
to.
So whether they don't laugh or they don't clap,
Who then clap or
exactly,
laugh or exactly.
But this creates
Who then feed us, just like with an audition, that's the thing too, is all result. I mean, you either get the job, you get the callback, or you don't.
exactly
And it's like and so it's very hard to again,
release that.
Exactly release it, because the whole system is set up to be, validated by somebody else, which is, and we all, in my opinion, how often do we hear the best work that people do is not when they say they don't give a shit about it, not
Right.
when they don't give a shit about, but when they don't give a shit about whether they book it or not,
Right,
or they don't give a
exactly.
shit about what the people think or
Yes.
not.
Yes.
It's like when you do it for you, at the end of the
Yep.
day, and it's like that's when people do their best work. And so I think it's probably the number one reason why, why people get on, as somebody who has had audition anxiety in the past and, still does at times, it's like, it's the number one reason why it's a miserable fucking experience, is because I have, again, no other scorecard than whether I booked it or not, or whether I got a call back,
which is not true. Meaning, just to say, like
not true.
Ross Schenker, I thought, I'm actually going to go find it. The casting associate, who's a buddy of ours, he answered some questions on our Patreon, and he said, I liked this one. I'm just going to read it out loud, because it kind of relates to this. And we've said this, but I just want to say this again. He said, "Oh, sorry, y'all. I'm on here looking." Okay, well, now I can't find it.
Fill in the
space. Anyway, basically it's about booking.
What did he say?
Basically, it's about booking the room, not the gig. That like, it was basically like becoming a yes later is more valuable than being a yes now. And I say that because if your metric is whether I booked or not, and then it fucks with us. You know what I mean? Because it doesn't actually. Yeah. Oh yeah, here it is. This is a simple question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received? You want to be in the yes for later pile. It's not about booking the job. It's about booking the room. So it's the simple idea. So that so then what that tells me, per what we're talking about, is that the metric isn't about booking. The metric that isn't the metric that we're trying to achieve. And therefore, yes, we want to put our best foot forward, but as we've said, like, we want to share our opinions and our point of view and our work, living up to our best values as consistently as we can, as opposed to, oh, let me try to do it exactly this way because this is how they want me to do it. Period. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay, let's talk about relationship building, networking in relation to fear of people's opinions, because this is another big one that really messes people up. We hear this all the time, that ultimately people are intimidated and are afraid of putting themselves out there, because we don't want people to think that we're trying hard. There's a theme throughout all. There's like a theme of like what it means to be alive in 24 is not being a try hard. So that fear, Mike's on a different website right now, I'm telling you. We're afraid. I can always tell because your eyes are like darting around the page. We have this fear of other.
You do it a lot more subtly.
That's true. We have this fear of people's opinions when it comes to relationship building, because we're just always already immediately afraid of, like, are they going to think that I immediately want something from them, or Or
Right.
I would even argue worse than that, and which is more reflective of like also fear of people's opinions. Who am I to ask them for anything? Like putting ourselves in weaker
Right.
positions.
And look, the thing is, it's networking's like marketing. It's like, and I love who said this. Oh, who the fuck said this? Was it Clay? Somebody said it doesn't matter who you know. It matters who knows
Yeah,
you. Who said
I
that?
think it was Clay. I
Who
think it
said
was
that?
Clayton Howe.
That was so good.
Yeah, yeah,
That was amazing. Like, because so like, what does that mean? Again, it's not about who you know. It's about like, are you putting yourself out there and trying to make relationships? Again, not with every single person, but with the people who you would like
sure.
to work with, whether they're big or small. On in quotation marks, on the grand scheme. And so it's like, yeah, the number one reason why we're not engaging people is because it's the same thing about seeming desperate or trying hard. There's a theater I'm really trying to get involved with, a theater company, and I have a friend who's very, very popular there, works all the time, and she's really advocating for me to get in there. And it's like I'm showing up to their things. I'm like, and it's like, at the end of the day, of course, there's a fear of like me seeming like, I'm putting myself out there too much. And that's bullshit, because it's like, how the fuck else are they going to know who I am? How the fuck else are they going to know that like I'm interested in like being a part of that? They're not just going to read my mind, right? And it's like, and yes, there are ways to play games, and it's like, to an extent I do that. It's never bad to play games, but also, listen, strategy is supplemental. I say this with everything. Strategy is supplemental. So yes, although you can be strategic about how you're getting in front of people without seeming to quote desperate, if that's what you're afraid of, at the end of the day, that's supplemental to mainly going out there and making connections. And it's like, yes, the number one reason why it's scary is because of desperation again. We don't want to seem desperate in front of people. We're afraid we're going to turn people off. And there's this other element which I mentioned to you and you agree, is like power dynamics. It's very scary to be somebody who is trying to make a connection with somebody else,
Sure.
because you are, if we're going to play this like, you're on the lower level to an
Right.
extent, because you are asking something from somebody else, to an extent. Even if you're not asking anything, which of course I think is always better, if you're like saying, hey, I saw your performance in X and I thought it was amazing, or I saw your play at Y, or I just watched your short film, I thought it was by even just reaching out, you are putting yourself in a quote weaker position, because you are then opening the door, you're then opening a door for connection to somebody that they can then either walk through or that they can just slam shut, right? Like that's always the risk we take whenever we try to connect with anybody. And so, but it's scary to feel
Less than.
that in that
Yeah.
vulnerable, yes, vulnerable. Frankly, it is a kind of a less than position to an
But it's
extent,
funny.
and you can always sweeten it.
It's
Yeah, by adding value or whatever. But it's like, no matter what, when you try to connect with somebody, it puts you in a slightly weaker position, which is hard.
This is just one area in particular for me that, and I'm not trying to be like, aren't I so great? This has just never been a problem. And what do I mean by that is, to your point about adding value and where I always feel bad when people feel so much like they don't have even they shouldn't even email. Who am I to email? Because they're so afraid of to your point, seeming so less than. We all provide. Everyone's out here. I know you believe you provide value. I know I provide value. This is why it doesn't, one way or the other, this person is lucky to be connected to me too. I don't even mean that in a braggadocious way. We can,
No.
excuse me, we can find something to work on together to create opportunity. And I would argue most people at every level of this industry, even people at the very top, are looking for opportunity, looking for the next thing. And if you have, and we're going to talk a little bit about tools and practices to maybe fight this fear of people's
Combat
opinions.
this.
Exactly. But if you have the confidence to go, I'm worthwhile, and worthy of being a potential collaborator. This is going to be, this will not feel so daunting. You won't care so much about what other people think, what their opinions are of you.
Exactly.
But that's a different set of work too.
Because you'll know that if you try to connect or engage with somebody and they don't reciprocate, they don't want to engage back with you, it's not the end of your world, because you know that there are people who would like to engage with you,
and in fact,
it's
it's their loss. How small-minded of them that they don't
Exactly.
see the opportunity for themselves. Now, you can't take necessarily responsibility for that, but you can relinquish the self-hate that comes out of, oh, that person didn't get back to me. I sometimes become a little
Right.
too self-righteous with this stuff, honestly, and have a tendency to resent it, not because it upsets me, because it makes me feel worse, but I'm like almost shocked that they didn't necessarily
Well, yeah, and it's like,
engage.
we'll talk about this, because it's like, where does indignation serve you? Because it can, and that sort of main character syndrome, can serve you, where it's like, why would they not respond, or why would they not, when we're not even remotely considering,
Yeah,
well, maybe they're incredibly busy,
right.
maybe
Sure.
their fucking
Absolutely.
mom is dead, or who the fuck.
100%.
It's like, but so it's not terrible to have that delusional main character syndrome, but it does need to be partnered with like true perspective,
100%.
to like. But let's talk about this final sort of area that fear of people's opinions can affect.
Right.
That's
Self-producing, right?
which is self-producing,
which
right.
is which we often
So,
say is our most powerful tool in our arsenal, and I do believe that.
Right. And in terms of what people are afraid of, right? So when we talk about when people are not self-producing, when they know they need to make their own work, which, I mean, who would argue that? I mean, I guess there are some people, I'm thinking about that fucking stupid ass podcast we did 2 years ago. They never released our episode. Or I guess that was 4 years ago now. There are some people who are interpretive artists, and they're not going to. I don't think anybody would argue that making your own work is important. So when people are afraid of doing it, I think it's obviously most of it has to do. I think a lot of it has to do with the fear of work. I think people are afraid of like working really hard and it going nowhere, and like the feeling of failure with that. But yes, most of it has to do with fear of people's opinions.
Yeah.
We're afraid of it not being good enough, and or that if it's bad, when you make a piece of art, put it out there, and look, so much of it, this has to do with taste and like the quality of the thing. So if you take time and I'm thinking of something, I'll bleep it out. I'm thinking of we're like, it's like but it's like, somebody low key, somebody puts a lot of fucking effort, into making something, a lot of publicizing it, and like really making like, and it's complete trash. That's, I think, the worst nightmare.
Interesting,
but let me say this.
Let me say this about that project, or like let's say, honestly, good for them though. Still, again, it's like, you were saying this man in the arena idea here. It's like, well, these people are out here doing it. If you are out there making work, yes, it might be bad, and that was one project where I thought, yeah, that was really bad, but at the same time, like, at least personally, I'm looking and going, good for them. Good for them
But I would argue that most people in this business do not see. Most people in this business, unfortunately, are not very forgiving people. And a lot of times, I think you and I do value that. Somebody who really like didn't just kind of go, "Ooh, this sucks. I'm gonna half-ass it," but instead really like blasted it, put it out there, blah blah blah. Like, you and I value that, but I think that most people in this business are not forgiving. They're really not, and it is scary. And there are real stakes to putting out something that is not good. There are real stakes to that. I would argue, because I probably would not engage, frankly, with that person. I would probably not engage or donate to their work again, because I did not.
Well, that's fair, but just to say to combat that, you do what you make more. just want to be clear, like, because a big theme of
Exactly. Sure.
a big
Yes.
theme of all of
100%.
this episode in terms of fear of people's opinions is and the balance of taking them in and what you do with them is, I would argue, to
Exactly.
stop stopping people in their tracks. So, and with self-producing in particular,
Right.
actually, let's just say
Right.
that, self-producing is such a great example where go out and fail. We've been talking a lot about Cola Scolo. I just think the world of him. But I remember when Cole and Jeffrey, nearly 20 years ago now,
Them. Good job.
did I say him? I
Yeah.
remember when Cole and Jeffrey were first making.
I think that old guy, that man, I just think he's wonderful. That fella.
But the amazing Cola Scola was out there making shit right from the beginning and never stopped and really did some crazy stuff. And now is like, the toast of Broadway in many ways with their new, sort of runaway success play that I imagine. I think it's going to keep playing for longer. And I just say this because what a great example of someone who, it's not that they didn't care necessarily. They were reaching their audience, as Cole would describe it, of gay drunk people, but they continued to sort of sharpen and hone and develop a point of view and share it over and over and over
Right.
again. And
Right.
this one in particular is so sensitive to me, because if this is the greatest tool that we have, is to go make our work, to develop a point of view, to share that point of view, and we're so held back by people's opinions because if a project doesn't go well, for example, and then we go, oh, and actually, Mike, we hear this all the time with artists that we work with one-on-one. They'll say, well, I did this and this and this, and it really didn't go well, and did it, whatever the reason was, and then they just stop. And
Right. As opposed to going like, oh, how do I?
right,
Well, okay, like no matter what, I need to be, again,
exactly,
if my values are around output and my values are around making as much as I can, if I put something out and it's trash, then I can just objectively look at that and go, well, I need to earn back trust. Okay.
right,
So I just need to make sure that the next
right,
things I put out are 10 times as good as I think
a
they need to
hundred
be, or
percent.
100 times as good as I think they need to be.
Yes.
How do I make things as excellent? But, again, this is why it's important to have a set of values, because if your values are, I would argue, if you have a value that's like output and efficient, output and speed, right? So, or output and frequency, if those are two values, process oriented values I have that are output and frequency, then I am not going to let, you know the this needs to be 100 times better than the last one get in the way of
Right.
still me putting out with frequency,
Right.
because that's ultimately the process in which I'm building. So that's why it's important to, again, have almost two sets of scorecards, in my opinion,
No, I
that
think that's
that
right.
you're looking at.
I also just want to say this other one about self-producing, which is
Yeah.
fundraising. We ask, essentially, why would they give me money? It's kind of the same idea of this credible or good enough, but it's we're so afraid of people's opinions, and yet we so desperately want to make things. But it's like, actually, when we talk about fundraising, like, why? Like, we know that it's hard to ask people to part with their money, because essentially what we're saying is, will you give me money that you might not have a lot of and take your chance on me and my work? And there's a certain level of embarrassment that can come along with that, because you're essentially going, do they think I am worthy enough? And I'm
Right.
afraid that if they say no, that might make me feel like the imposter that I am, or something like that. But
Right.
again, that fear of people's other opinions stops us dead in our tracks, as opposed to,
Right.
it's funny, I would argue that what's coming up for me a lot as we talk about this is simply a lack of confidence. A potential lack of
Yes.
confidence is what's going to make fear of people's opinions all the worse. So if you are someone who goes, oh my gosh, yeah, that's scary for me, I don't like to post, I don't want to ask people for people's money, and it is based off of their opinions, it's probably a good sign that you are lacking confidence. And what a tricky thing. Again, I don't care, you're selling tires, you're selling knapsacks, you're making donuts, or you're an actor. If you don't have confidence in the
Right.
thing that you are offering, if you don't believe in it, if you don't, and that's all predicated on outside validation of other people saying to you, oh, I choose you, and therefore now my opinion, if we live our lives predicated on other people's opinions, yikes, that's a pretty dangerous spot to be in. That's just coming up for me more and more as we talk about this, you know?
Right. And well, the next point here, which I think is relevant to this, is there's the audience and you self-produce, but there's collaborators too. And look, we're in a situation where this cancel culture shit, in my opinion, is debilitating people's confidence, because we are looking too much to other people to validate and approve
Sure,
of our
sure.
actions, because we are so why do I say this? I think a lot of times people are afraid of self-producing is because they're afraid to step into the driver's seat, because whether we like it or not, most people who step into the driver's seat and take control of a project or lead
Yes.
are and this has always been the case, but it's so much, it's the man in the arena. It's so much easier for people to be on the sidelines and pointing and seeing where the strong man failed or could have done better, or where they, stumbled and how they would have done it differently, but they're not the ones up there actually fucking
Right.
doing it. And so, I think there's this real fear of coming across as as people judging you as a leader, people judging you as a producer. And look, what's wild is that if you're afraid of that, then you're probably somebody who should be producing more. Because look, frankly, how often do we hear horror stories of producers truly being dicks, like mistreating their fucking cast, or being like monster? Like, there are leaders who are fucking monsters out there. Like, I'm not saying that there aren't, but isn't it amazing that a lot of times they're still fucking going because they don't give a shit about what other people think about them? And so you, as somebody who might be a little more conscious, a little bit more empathetic, we need people like you. But you cannot let the fear of people, of hurting people or misleading it's like that's going to be that's part of the job description, bro.
Yeah.
It's like, so but I really think that, again, it circles back to what you're saying about this confidence ideas. We're placing so much in this moment on how we're perceived by others,
Absolutely.
and it's and it not being a place to get better. I mean, look at all these fucking theaters, like theaters doing shit like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but like, we'll do a fucking land acknowledgement, we'll do a fucking this, we'll do a that, we'll have a this, we'll have a that. And it's not coming from a place of earnestness. It's not coming from a place of, it's coming from pure fear. It's coming from pure fear 95% of the time. And so it's not effective, because if it was coming from a place of really wanting to do it and really wanting to, then it would be effective. It would reach the people they wanted to reach. It would also keep their subscribers, because they would find a way to do it that's not, like, we're afraid we're going to get canceled or lose funding or bullshit. Like, so, fear in general can be an effective motivator, but only to certain levels. Like, fear is the mind killer, and 95% of the time. And so, especially when you are externalizing that fear, the point I'll make before we say how to combat this, it's good to be, fear in general is bad. Where fear of other people's opinions really is bad is because you're fearing something that you truly have no control over.
Right.
You're fearing something that you truly is outside of your control. It's like, better to fear your opinion,
Sure.
or better to fear falling short of your standards. I'm not saying that you should be fearing that. Fear is not good overall, but it's better to fear something that you have control over than to fear something that you have absolutely no control over. So it's a double whammy of,
the biggest thing is like,
yeah.
is like, just again, all of us, those listening, and am I letting other people's opinions dictate how I live the precious short life that I
Right.
have to live, especially for artists, and I think for many of us, whether we mean to or not, we do. In different ways. Myself, we all do this. We all care about people's opinions in various ways. And what a small life to
Right.
live. So we did spend some time thinking about, ways to combat fear
Ways to
of
combat
of
it.
of people's opinions. And I want to know this first one because I think this is actually really important. And that is essentially making sure that you surround yourself with a community and people that understand you and support you. I've been talking about this a lot recently because think about the people in our lives who don't make us feel good. And it's not about falsehoods. It's not about
Right.
bullshit, like just feeding us shit that yes, people, yes, men and women and people who just tell us what we want to hear. But making sure that we aren't letting into our world people who we know we do not feel good around, who's, you know what I'm saying? Because this is one way to make sure that we don't have those
Yes.
negative voices in the back of our fucking heads.
This is what I love. This is what I find great about Carolina, just to say, like, she's overly sensitive. I don't think she would mind me saying that. She's very sensitive. But where I respect it is because she really has no tolerance for negativity. Like has very little time. Like even teasing, like even like if it she teasing is not because she really wants to create a space of positivity all like as much as she can, and that's like her way of like coping and it's like and it's a great point because yes, you let little things slip. Negativity creeps in. You're saying, oh, this person's not that bad, or you engage in negativity with someone, whether it's passing judgment on other people or which we'll talk about. Maybe we should talk about it now, but it's because it has to do with it. It's like if you surround yourself with judgmental people and you are judgmental, then guess what? Like you're probably going to fear that on others more
Sure.
because
Yes.
you have seen it,
Right.
because you are experiencing it. You're
Yeah.
creating, and whether you believe in karma or not, you are creating an environment around you
Yes.
of judgment.
Yes.
I really think I'm going to say something that's, you know, I am far too negative. I pass judgment. I talk shit. I judge other people, and I will guise it under like oh, this is my opinion, or oh, this is like whatever the fuck, like you know well, this is like just me like engaging in discourse, or but so much of it's negative. So much of what I engage with is negative, and I need to do a better job of ridding my life of that as much
And
as
do you
possible
feel like
because it is just too fucking
do you
hard.
feel like having someone like Carolina in your life actually helps you be aware of that and move away from that?
Yes.
Well, this is my point then. That the
Yes, I would argue.
community,
it's like,
yeah.
it's like the
Hmm.
amount, even you and I, like, look, we're not, but you and I talk shit and we
Sure.
fucking like shoot the
Yeah.
shit and like that, and I think that we're overall positive influences in each other's
Yeah.
lives, but it's like, I shouldn't allow that, in my sphere as much, from me or from the people I care about. It's like,
Sure.
because whether I know it or not, I am setting up subconsciously the sort of the soup, right? The sort of stew of like negativity and judgment, and probably projecting that onto other people all the time.
Which then to the point of the
Anyway,
episode too comes out in this fear of other people's opinions. So, yeah,
right.
surrounding ourselves with people who and artists that we want to work with. And it's funny, it's like I won't go into it. I know I've been holding on to it, but I
Right.
think about that experience that we had with this play that we're doing. And that really, like, I still really resent what happened, and I'm not going to get into it because it doesn't matter. The point is that it bred a not good environment over something so small that I don't want to be terrified of that kind of bullshit, with other outside art. Like, I have no interest in it. Not interested in that. you know,
Right.
and again, it's this, anyway, period. Regular self-reflection. Let's talk about this as a way to combat fear of people's opinions. Whether this is through journaling or therapy, taking the time, actually, like what you just did, like clearly, whether at some point, whether it just happened now or in general, there was a moment of self-reflection for yourself to go, oh, well, am I allowing for X, Y, or Z negativity? and
Right.
and this kind of regular self-reflection, I would argue, allows you to find that healthy balance and the filter that we're also talking about, in a way,
Right.
to um uh be able to take in information while it not necessarily feeling like we are consumed by it. um
Well, also it's about, it's like motivation, right? Like, we're saying that fear of other people's opinions is dangerous. How do we know that we're afraid of other people's opinions unless we're doing self-reflection? Wow, I'm really not doing this.
mm-hmm.
I'm
Yes,
not really doing X,
yes,
Y, and Z thing because I'm afraid of other people think. Like, it's a core step. Like, you need to be examining like what's and look, there are no hard and fast answers to life, but it's like, you may discover that it plays a major part in a lot of your motivation, a lot of your intention, motivations, lack of actions around things that you want to do. Like, it's a fear of what people are going to think
sure,
about you. And so, of course, like self-reflection and asking yourself why, and trying to, exam and even frame it. One thing I would suggest you're doing is, if anybody's listening right now, take 10 minutes to journal. I might do this today. I think I will actually when we're done, but it's like, where are a couple of areas I'm not seeing growth right now, where I want to see growth, and then frame it through, again, everything's a fucking frame. Does this Am I not seeing growth here because I'm afraid of other people's opinions? And journal on that question. Like, how can my fear of other people's opinions be holding me back? Oh, I'm
absolutely,
not getting an
yes,
agent. Okay, I don't have an
yes.
agent, or I'm not booking the way I not booking or not getting in the room for the kind of jobs I want to
Yes,
be, or I'm not writing. I really want to be writing and I'm not doing that. Okay, so we normally come up with all these excuses as to why it's happening, but just for today or tomorrow, or set some time aside this week to go, might this how could this be related to my fear of other people's opinions, and do some stream of consciousness, and you may see that it may have more to do with other people's opinions than even you realize right
a
now.
hundred
I
percent,
might do that today. I think that's
a
interesting. But
hundred percent, a
anyway,
100%.
um
Um, so the other thing we put here
next.
was to keep learning, and here's how it relates to this idea of combating fear of people's
Right.
opinions. The reason why I specific like this idea of continuing to learn is because I do think this is fascinating that we
Right.
as artists have a tendency to be like, okay, I went to school and I'm all done now, as opposed to like, no, like I'm constantly in a state of how can I grow, and therefore, if I'm constantly in a growth mindset, then fear of people's opinions might not feel
Right.
like such a heavy burden, because it's not an opinion isn't so reflective of like, well, aren't I perfect, but instead it could give some
Right.
malleability to the idea of like, well, of course I'm not perfect, of course someone's going to have an opinion on what I'm doing,
Right.
and that's wonderful, because I am still
Always.
growing and learning, and I'm not done. I'm only a quarter of the way
Always.
through my life. There's more shit to do.
We could always improve, and this is the key. I know I keep kind of circling back to this, but what's so good about what you're saying is right. You're basically talking about viewing other people's. It's like the criticism thing. It's like, oh, it's not. It's an opportunity as for to grow, as opposed to like something that debilitates my confidence or hurts my validate whatever. But again, you have to know where you're growing towards. If your measure of success is results, is bookings, is people liking you, is applause, is laughter, is whatever the fuck it is. If that is your growth, if that's when you talk about, if that's the pendulum or the matrix or the x-axis that you are trying to grow along, then you are, in my opinion, you are going to be constantly setting yourself up
For
for
failure,
feelings of
disappointment.
inadequacy
Yeah,
and failure,
exactly.
as opposed to if I have set my own
Yeah,
criteria
yeah,
for what growth is, that's internal, then I am probably going to be much more likely to take in people's opinions. Almost ironically, I'm able to take in external opinions more because I have an internal sense of what growth looks like
yes,
and what learning looks
yes,
like and what getting better
for
looks
sure.
like, you know?
I think that's right.
Um,
This next one is
you know,
major here, if I
yeah.
may, because this we'll keep coming back to, and you wrote this down, but fostering a radical sense of confidence in yourself. Um, Easier said than done, but let me just say this again. There is a theme among all strong entrepreneurs of any kind, and you called it sociopathic, or you kind of jokingly do, but the truth is that to be a really strong entrepreneur, to be someone who is offering to and solving a problem, bringing something to the table, you likely are incredibly confident. Easier said than done. Now you wrote these two things down here, so, and I think we might have talked about them a little bit. But so why don't you speak on them a little bit in terms of the process of fostering that radical confidence?
Yeah, yeah. Well, fostering radical self confidence, I mean, a positive mindset, right? Like, this is again has to go to the negativity thing. It's viewing things as, if you're viewing everything as an opportunity for growth, and you're viewing positively, if you're viewing everything from a positive lens and really seeing that, then fear becomes less in general, especially fear of other people's opinions, because you start to see everything as serving you, right? This is where almost main character syndrome can be helpful. If you believe that everything that happens is something to serve you on your path towards self actualization and being the best you can be, then, you won't fear anything because everything is working positively for you in that direction. And listen, boy, that is something that I can really have more in my life of. I mean, truly, I am such a pessimist so much of the time, in terms of having a victim mindset and like everything is sort of uh, you know and so I think this is no joke. I know it sounds kind of, but it's really no joke. It's like it's too fucking hard in this business
I hear you.
to not foster radical
Yeah,
positivity,
yeah.
because it will make you better and it will allow you to learn more and to foster that sort of main character syndrome of everything serving you. But however, there's also this other piece of the pie which I think is equally important, which is ease and non-attachment,
You know,
right?
yeah.
Because
We'll
you may
talk about
have,
that. No,
yeah,
we'll talk
please.
talk about the
Yeah.
ease and non-attachment part.
Well, because yes, you need to have main character syndrome and everything is serving me and da 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 da. But I think equally important is, so what? Okay, so somebody doesn't like my acting. Okay. Who care? At the end of the day, is that really the most important thing? Perspective, right? And like, having a sense of like, you know, and this comes with, again, with having a strong inner sense of what you're trying to grow along. And if you're able to commit to that and be non-attached and easy about what other people think about you, as opposed to getting defensive, right? Because so much of the time, this is kind of what you were talking about, where it's like almost getting resentful. It's like, oh, if somebody doesn't respond to my email, or it's like if I don't get it, or like somebody doesn't respond in a way that I think I'm deserving of, and maybe because they value me, yes, you could take it to the extreme. You could take it to the maximalist, sort of main character story of I'm the piece of shit at the center of the universe that everything revolves around. And so if somebody is not responding to my email or somebody does not give me the part, it has to do entirely with me. And it has to do entirely, that's the lens we can view things through. And I'm not saying that that's not useful at times, but I think what's equally valid, and I think the balance needs to be found, is like that's not true. That's objectively not. You are not the center of the universe. You are not the center of everybody's life. So it's like, if people don't, if like if people do not laugh at the show, it may have nothing to do with your performance. Maybe do because the debate was that night. People are, it's like you know, that's what ease and non-attachment comes in, because we latch on to things and we start to spin a lot of times maximalist theories about in extremes
Do you,
around what is going on. You do this a lot, actually, but
well, okay, that is so.
I do it too, but you
Well,
do it a lot.
wait, hold on a fucking second, because this is literally going to say this is so funny to me, because this is what's interesting to me about the two of me. I absolutely do it, but you absolutely do it too. And here's my point, though. What's funny?
Oh, of course.
But what's funny is usually you and I are on like completely different ends of the spectrum. Like there will be.
Oh, of course.
But this is so interesting. Like the thing that like really triggers me that I won't let go of. Like you're like, who cares? And just to be honest, so what's funny to me is like, I don't know, it kind of drives me nuts, because I'm like, what? Because then the things that like don't bother me at all, you're like going on about and on and on.
Yes.
What is that about? And I'm trying to even like, I was thinking about this the other day. Like
I don't know.
What is the theme? I'm thinking like the themes of the things, and maybe it's just like a day-to-day situation, because there are some things that like I'm like where you're like fuck them. And
no,
then
this thing that
like,
happened with
like,
the show that we're in, and you're like, yeah, exactly. This thing that happened in the show that we're in.
oh yeah,
You know,
I'm still
or even
disappointed.
like I'll bleep it out.
I'm
but
still
like
disappointed.
how you and I have completely flipped on. Like, you know, it's
Or
like,
like
exactly. It's like,
we have to bleep.
yeah,
We have to bleep on
and
all
so,
those
but
names.
again. I know, yeah. But anyway, so that is, you know, and you know, just to kind of wrap it up here, you know, because I know you have to go in a couple minutes, but you know, again, the two things I think for me are huge are not judging others. If you don't judge others, and if engage with others as you would like to be engaged
Yep.
with, I think that's a great term of, you know, give people the benefit of the doubt that you would want for yourself, you know, as
Yep.
opposed to saying that sucks or that's not good. Well, give yourself, what are they trying to do? What are they, give yourself this pass judgment, to quote, on people the way that you would like judgment passed on you. That's huge. I really
Right.
believe that's probably that's probably the number one thing you can do if you're really afraid of people's opinions, because then you start to change your mindset and you probably won't see that as much in other people. Right? If you're setting that stage for yourself. But I think the most important thing, in my opinion, is having your own sense of where you're trying to grow and what's important to you, and
Right.
like having a process oriented scorecard.
Right.
Because you cannot control what other people think about you. You cannot control other people's reactions to you.
Sure.
Right? You cannot. But if that is, it's so hard in this business to have an internal process oriented scorecard. But listen, sports psychologists, believe it or not, sports is objectively even more about results than fucking acting or art is. Like, it's about who won the game and who didn't win the game. But the number one thing that sports psychologists recommend to athletes to get into flow and to play better is to actually care less about the score, care less about the results, and to have an internal process oriented scorecard. Like, before I took the shot, did I have a positive thought? Right? Before I, you know, did I do my pre-training routine that I always do? Did I take the shot when I was ready to take the shot, and not just out of the, you know, these are the types of questions that sports psychologists ask again, athletes, which is like not a subjective thing. Sports is not subjective. There's a winner and there's a fucking loser.
Right. Did you make the hoop? Is that
exactly? But this is how did you make the hoop? But it's like, so if that's the case for them, if you do not have a process oriented scorecard for yourself, this is what Laura Henry would talk about with auditioning, right? It's like, this is like, you know, like the post audition scorecard for yourself. You have to, I would argue that this is probably the most important thing that we all need to combat fear of people's opinions, in my opinion.
No, I hear that.
The end.
I hear that.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely right. So, you know, take this episode for what it's worth. It's again, the macro thing for me is how fear of people's opinions stops most people, and how sad that is for them in a lot of ways. Okay, comfort food performances.
Nice. Okay.
I'll start. We watched, we watched The Gift. We watched a lot of horror films. We watched The Gift the other day,
Oh, that one.
and I forget who the girl.
I don't know
is,
that one.
Jason Bateman, who I usually don't always love. Jason Bateman, to be honest with you, it's just not always my vibe.
Which one? Is he the one from Ozark?
He is the one from Ozark and Arrested Development. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
He's so great in this movie. It's just one of those movies where like you find.
What's it about?
It's about this. I don't want to give away the ending, but basically, they move into this new house, and there's a man from this guy's past who shows up. He went to high school with him, and he drops off a gift at their house. But then it becomes more and more. All of a sudden, he's putting fish in their pond, and he shows up unannounced. Hey, can I come over? And I invite him over for dinner, and things get odd, and
it's just like a stalker.
It becomes basically
almost,
a stalker. And Jason Bateman gives a really interesting, nuanced but dynamic performance in it, and I was just a big fan of it. So Jason Bateman in The Gift is my comfort food performance.
And he plays the stalker.
No, he plays the guy who the guy basically is stalking. Mike's looking for his
plays
right
the
now.
Stalker. Exactly.
I keep him in a note on my phone.
No, I was gonna say Eyes Wide Shut. Tom Cruise and Eyes Wide Shut. I already talked. Well, Carolina, I made Carolina watch it with
She
me,
didn't like it.
and oh man, that was bad. Oh, that was bad. That was a bad choice. She really hated it,
Really?
and like didn't talk to me for a little
What are
bit.
you talking about?
She
You didn't
despised
make
it.
it.
I know, but she was like, the fact that I like this movie, like I had to be like talk her down and be like, well, you like Saw, that doesn't mean that you kill people, right? It's like, just because I like this movie doesn't mean I'm like a misogynist.
Of
You know what I mean?
course.
Because it is low-key a misogynistic movie. But
But it's art.
Tom Cruise, I'm sorry. Daddy Tom, I know. Daddy Tom, I know, and she had a strong opinion to it, which I respect. There are movies that I have strong opinions about. But Daddy Tom Cruise in that, as always, perfection. You know what I love about Tom Cruise? He's quirky.
He is quirky.
He's quirky. He's so hot.
He is quirky.
And he's like a leading man, and he can do the leading man, but he has quirks. He's weird.
I agree.
He's weird. Like and like in that movie, he's fucking weird. He does all this weird shit. Like anyway, Tom and Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
All right.
Okay, that's it, folks. See you soon.
All right,
Ta-ta.
piggies. We hope that you enjoyed today's episode of the Creative Risk Podcast. If you did, a review goes a long way. So make sure that you're following us on whatever platform you listen to. And if you're catching this on YouTube, be sure that you like and subscribe so that you can get alerts when new content drops. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, subscribe to us. And if you want ongoing new content that's exclusive, you can't get anywhere else, follow us on Patreon, subscribe to our Patreon for as low as $5 a month. All right, thank you, friends.